welcome to another episode of Shameless Stories. And today I'm very excited to be joined by Caroline, the Menopause Alchemist, who has joined me to talk about her shameless story. And as you know, this podcast, we kind of dive into things that could have held us back, stories that we've been telling ourselves that may have stopped us from doing things I'm going to just dive straight in because we always do this. We have a little chat before we join on the podcast and all the good stuff comes out.
That's just the way, isn't it?
That's the way. So, Caroline, you were telling me a little bit about yourself before we jumped on, and what really fascinated me is your background. So do you want to tell the listeners where you came from and kind of why you're sitting in this space?
So it's been a strange journey to look back on, because I was brought up in a family where my dad, he left school, went to university, became a solicitor, and did that his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And my mum gave up work. So that was kind of the dynamic. And although I was never led to believe, you get married, have children, stay at home, I always believed you should have a career and you should do one thing. I was never told that, but that's the story. And I always kind of felt a bit of, well, I've done it the wrong way. I've held on to that story from childhood, I think. But when I look back, I was supposed to go to university and I left after 2 or 3 days because I was homesick. Although I do wonder now, when I look back, maybe there was something else at play telling me this isn't right for you.
Yeah.
I then took myself off to Israel because I had a fascination with Israel and the Jews. So I took myself off to Israel to volunteer on a kibbutz.
Yeah.
Came back after 3 months, then decided I wanted to go back. I wanted more. Went back for another 6 months. Came back, joined the army, became an Arabic linguist. Did that for about 4 or 5 years. Wow. And then I got married. We were living in Cyprus, had kids, came back, got a job. Do you remember the old YTS schemes?
Yes, I do.
So I was a coordinator doing that. Came back to the UK, got a job in the training world, delivering MVQs. Started working for my partner 25 years ago and kind of just started doing accounting. And it was literally from, I'll do an invoice or put a check in. And from that, I did my accounting training and I thought that was it. And then it was only, I think, coming up to 2019, my partner was selling one of these companies. And I thought, this is a time. I'll just go on my own. I'll set up and see what happens. And of course, we all know what happened in just at the turn of 2020. I'd set up on my own, COVID, and menopause decided to descend.
Right.
So all these, and that was just the start of the last 5 years of change and of hardship. It was really, really tough those early days because I had menopause symptoms of fatigue. Well, I said it was fatigue, but it was brain fog. It was so much brain fog and I didn't recognize it as that. And I had just a reluctance to put myself out there. I was scared of getting people's accounts and just looking at them, not knowing what to do. Because when you work in industry, you become very familiar with the work you're doing every day. If you go out into the world, you're doing a bit of theirs, a bit of theirs. Now, unless you niche, and it's hard to know what you want to niche in, I used to open up some clients' accounts and just be like, oh, I can't deal with that. It was that kind of feeling, just, no, I can't do this. But as is the same for a lot of women in menopause, we're in denial.
Yeah, very much so. In fact, it's really funny that you're talking into this because I had a conversation with a friend of mine only kind of this week when we were recording this, and had this realization that the last 9 months I thought I'd just been useless, flip-flopping about, don't really know what I'm doing. Clients were falling away, but the clients that I was working on were easy clients that I could do, and I was looking after my kids at the time. My mum got sick and all of these things. And it's like, oh, there's a reason all of this stuff fell away so that I
Yeah.
could like navigate what I needed. The minute I kind of stopped being in resistance and trying to do it
Yeah.
on my own,
Yeah.
I things changed. So
Yeah. It's almost like an acknowledgement, isn't it? When you acknowledge, if you don't know, you don't know, then you
yeah,
can't do anything about it. But when that little spark of, oh, right, okay, and then you can start to go on that journey and things make a little bit more sense.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. And I mean, I'd like to just go back into what you were just sharing a minute ago, because we
mm,
talked about how as menopause in itself, I don't I'm not sure if it's shameful, if it's full of shame moving into menopause, but I think the symptoms that come up as a result of menopause, and especially as you've worked in a very masculine environment, so you were in the military, you need to be on it, don't you, when you're in that situation and everything's very process driven, and even working around guys, you sometimes it's really easy to be around guys, but when
mm.
emotions come into it, that becomes difficult. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. And I think for me anyway, there was this, I can do it on my own and I don't need help.
Yeah,
And you become like that in a very masculine environment because men just get on with it. So you conform, you try and fit in. You don't say anything that's going to rock the boat. You don't want somebody to look at you any differently from anybody else.
yeah,
And I know for me, I didn't want to go. So the start of my menopause symptoms, actually, Sarah, if I kind of explain it, I knew it was fatigue, although it was really brain fog as well in that. What I had is about 2 or 3 instances where I'd gone into this deep depression, but only for seconds. It was like, I can explain it like you're standing at the deep end of a swimming pool,
yeah,
and I jumped in straight to the bottom, straight back out again. It was literally seconds. But in that moment, it felt suicidal. And I had these glimpses of it. And I remember thinking, I'm not telling the doctor that. I'm not going to admit that because they might put me on antidepressants, which when you're in menopause are probably it's a lot of the time it's hormonal.
yeah,
So there's reluctance. There is shame there.
yeah, massive shame,
Mm,
because you feel like you're going a bit mad.
mm.
That's all I can liken it to. It's like one minute you're happy and everything's great, and then it just takes one little trigger or one little thing just to send you into a spiral of self-loathing. That's all I
Yeah,
can put it
yeah,
as. That's all I can like quantify it as. Like my poor girls. I'm like, mummy's like going a bit nuts today. I'm really sorry. Like, I mean, the amount of repairing I'm having to do because
yeah, yeah,
I've lost the plot over something really silly,
yeah,
and it's as quick as it's over within the. It's.
yeah,
I mean, you can talk about the depression bit, like take like you said, it like it's a little wave and then it goes away
yeah,
again. I found that with
yeah,
rage as well. Like I
yeah.
feel that like there's lots of really strong emotions that just go through really quick,
And it's
and it's
hard to explain
crazy.
to younger well any child really, and it's hard to explain to partners
Well,
because
grown-ups.
because often we don't know as women, we don't know what's going on. There's all these emotions, and we don't. We probably know about menopause only because we've seen our mum or our sisters, and a lot of people. My only experience was my mum going through it, and I remember I was a teenager and she'd just be like this and she'd be sweating and she'd be a little bit irritable, I remember. But that was my experience of it. Didn't know anything. We don't get taught anything about it. And there's still a lot of women who go to their GP and are actually, because GPs get very little training on menopause during their initial medical training. And I have heard of women being told, well, you just have to go through it. It's something all women go through. You know,
Yeah.
you just have to put up with it. Or
I mean,
I put up with it, so you have to. And that's from a medical professional.
yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen that in the press where I had a menopause expert. She was commenting on. I think there was a whole recently. There was this whole discussion around people taking time off to process
Mm.
you know, bad symptoms. And there was somebody talking about it being a good thing, and there was somebody else who was a woman who'd clearly gone through the menopause, who was
Mm.
very, very anti. Like, why should we do this? I went through it,
Yeah.
and it's kind of, wow, you're a woman, you've been through
Yeah.
this, you know what, you know how horrendous it is, and you're out the other side, and you're. But part of me thought, well, maybe that's because she didn't have that luxury and she had to go through it. I mean, I
Exactly.
appreciate that some people have different experiences, and some people have literally no symptoms, and some people are just, and it's the same with periods, isn't it? I think that's
Yeah. I have a friend who I was chatting to about it. She's mid-50s. And because she said to me, she said she'd had to go to the doctors. And the doctor, I don't know what it was about, but the doctor had asked her, when was your last period? She said, oh, it was a couple of years ago. He said to her, oh, well, you're post-menopause. And she's like, oh, okay. No symptoms whatsoever. And I'm sat there thinking,
oh,
what?
you.
But it's weird. It's weird how some people just don't get anything.
Mm,
And it's so different. It is so incredibly, but that just tells us that, you know, as individuals, as humans, we are so unique. Our
yeah,
bodies are so unique, and we carry with us what we've been through in life. And actually, what I believe, you know, I know a lot of people might not, but previous lives, you know, we have all this that we have within us. So we're all so incredibly different. So the way
yeah,
we treat a huge thing like menopause, because it's a huge hormonal shift, just like when I remember being a teenager and not understanding why I was getting ratty.
yeah,
You know, it's just that turmoil that you go through. Except as an adult, as a teenager, everybody expects it. Oh, it's just the teens. But
yeah,
as a woman going through menopause, and it's not necessarily as a teenager, you are going to get those hormones between the ages of probably 11 and 18. As a woman in menopause, it's not going to be, oh, when you reach 45, it'll start, or 50 or 55. It could be women in their 20s start experiencing sometimes, or the 30s, which is early menopause, and they're not getting the support they need.
no,
But saying, oh, no, 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 you're too young.
yeah. Well, that's I've had friends that were turned away from the doctor because they were too young, but also where I ended up going was I and I don't like the fact that I had to do this, but I went into my victim. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this, you kind of have to lay it on a bit thick
Yes.
to gets taken seriously and to be seen and heard. And it's like, well, I mean, I was granted HRT, and that started back in June, and it's definitely, I'm nearly at the end of my cycle, and it's definitely leveled things out for me. I've been
Yeah.
able to get on and do things and be able to function normally, and that was the biggest thing for me, the thing that I found the hardest, because again, like yourself, I worked in a very masculine environment
Mm.
up until about 10 years ago, and I needed to get stuff done. And
Yeah.
the fact that I couldn't was just, I kept beating myself up over it. It's like, I'm not getting
Yeah.
everything done, and this I don't understand. And it's like you're walking through toffee and things are moving
Yes.
away. And like, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what you do, you just can't seem to get things done. It's really odd.
It's like,
So odd.
yeah, it's that I used to look at my screen, and I know a lot of, I mean, our cognitive awareness and abilities go down as we get older anyway. We know that. And we've probably all had it. We walk into a room and think, I've forgotten what I've come here for. I think that kind of thing is normal.
Yeah.
But when it's, I used to have my tabs open on my computer, and I'd be working on something, think, oh, I've just got to go and do that. And I'd literally minimize that one thing and sit there for 30 seconds because I couldn't recall where I'm supposed to go next. It's like that, it's gone.
Yeah.
And you're scrabbling around. What was I doing? Trying to retrace everything. And then eventually it comes to you, and you're like, and we know with energy that our attention is then just taken away from, it's not just a few seconds out of jumping from one task to another. The
Yeah.
energy that that takes from us, the time it takes to get back in. So, no, that's why we're not achieving the way we used to.
But then I guess there's an argument to be said that that's why we are women and they are men. And,
Yeah.
there is an element of acceptance around being a woman and how we look at the world differently. And that's, it's something that I mean, my husband and I are constantly like, he's like, why don't you remember this? And can't you remember that? And it's like, honestly, do you know how much is going on in this brain of mine?
Oh my goodness. I was talking about this the other week with somebody, and not only do women, because I think you talk about multitasking. I know people say you can't physically multitask, but we do take on a lot, and we have a lot of tabs open in our brain to, you're dealing with children, you're dealing with elderly parents, you're dealing with your work, you're running the family home as well. The majority, I would say, of women take on that responsibility for ensuring the home operates,
Yeah.
as smoothly as possible. You're the one who probably thinks of all the birthday and Christmas presents. You're the one who thinks of the kids or school, childcare, who's going to organise that, what time do they have to be at school clubs and everything. And I think it's predominantly the woman who takes that on. So we've got so much more going on.
It's no wonder we've got brain fog.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I don't think, and that brings me on to something else. I think it's very hard for women to practice self-care because we have responsibilities that we can't just shut off. I think that's innate in a woman.
Yeah.
We are I'm not saying we're more caring than men, of course, but I've certainly experienced a lot of guilt slowing down. And in my menopause journey, that was the whole underlying principle of it. It was telling me, you're going too fast, and I'm going to send you all these symptoms until you listen, all these experiences until you learn from it, because you're not where you're supposed to be, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And it was self-care. Slowing down is hard. For me, it was full of guilt, full of feeling, oh, I'm just sitting here meditating and like, oh, just being lazy. That is a real, that's been quite hard, that journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think you're alone in that. I think lots of different, I think there's different levels in as a woman where you have to kind of shed that guilt every single time when you become a mum, when you become, when you're when you become a carer, when you become even I'm witnessing my own daughter going through into her menarche, and it's seeing what at the beginning of it all, it's very powerful actually, witnessing a woman and her changing seasons and cycles. And I think it's so like another thing you mentioned before we joined was, there's this physical piece that we talk about and people are aware of, that this stuff goes on, but it's that spiritual piece, that awakening within ourselves. I want to kind of dig into that a little bit with regards to like, what would you call your shameless story? So is there an element of, we talk about guilt, we talk about shame, what is it that kind of led you to meeting with me and talking about your story today?
Do you know what? I think I've done a bit of work over the past few years. Part of it was hypnosis, RTT.
Yeah.
And if anybody's ever done that, they'll know how powerful it is when you tap back into your stories from childhood and realize that all children carry trauma. We all carry trauma, because trauma's not just the big things, the nasty things that happens. So the little comments that you then think, oh, I remember being told that as a child. And I think for me, there were times when I wasn't listened to as a child.
Yeah.
And that's made me do this as an adult. I, you know, yeah, and it wasn't by my parents, not, it was in a school setting. I'm one of my grandparents, I remember. And I think, and bullying at school as well, being bullied over, it was where we lived, which I had no control over. You don't, do you, as a child?
No.
But being told, oh, you think you're better than the rest of us because you live there. So all these kind of things have made me, okay, I'll just fit in, I'll be quiet, and I won't say anything. I won't give my opinion on anything because, who does she think she is? And that's been a huge part of my journey. Now, whilst I knew as an adult, I'd rather have the quiet life and not upset anybody. I think menopause, when it came along, just said it threw it all out threw it everywhere, and just like, sorry, it's about time you've got to deal with this stuff.
Yeah.
So I think I carried, is it shame? Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. You live something long enough, and we have these things and we're not even aware of them. This is the thing. For years and years and years, I led this life, this quiet, small life, without even realizing what it was.
Yeah.
Like we spoke about at the beginning, awareness. Once you bring awareness to something, you're like, and as difficult as it is, because when you're on this journey and you're making changes, and you start looking at yourself and thinking, and part of it is talking about it,
Yeah.
because so many people don't. We
No.
don't talk about, don't talk about your periods. Nobody wants to listen to your
Yeah.
periods. Don't talk about if you've got hot flushes, and trying to hide everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say it's that, don't step out of line. And obviously I chose careers like in the military where you didn't. It was easy for me to fit in the military. The military was ideal for me because it's like you just get told, do this, do that, turn up here at this time, and you're not really allowed to give your view or opinion on anything. So you don't step outside the boxes.
Yeah.
But then as you get older, you start to look back and you think, yeah, you get a different perspective the older you get, which I never knew. I never thought, I kind of just thought, oh, my life would be the same. And I remember one time, and it must have been mid-40s, I remember specifically looking out my bedroom window and just getting this overwhelming feeling of, oh, it was almost like life wasn't as jaggy around the edges, wasn't as
Yeah.
hard. And that wasn't anything to do with having a little bit more money as you get older and your kids are sort of like getting older. So, you're not spending as much. It wasn't anything to do with that. It was just a general feeling of, oh, okay. And I'm wondering now when I look back if that was part of my menopause journey way before anything else happened.
That's so interesting. And like another comment you made off air was just digging into that a little bit more, was around feeling more comfortable around men and
Mm.
preferring being around men.
Yeah.
Do you feel that has now changed, that narrative has shifted since you?
Because I mean, I've met so many incredible women, um, who've just shown me a different way. And the number of women who I've met who said, I was the same. I
Yeah.
didn't like women before. And I'm like, oh, we all know in our heads that we're probably all struggling with a lot of similar things in life, but we always think it's just us.
Yeah.
we sit here, and especially if you're working from home or you work on your own, it's very easy, you know, to get into that way of thinking that it's just me going through this problem. And it never usually is. But yeah, the thing about I remember I've always liked my own company anyway. And there was a group of us at school, there were about 5 of us girls who were really good friends. And I was just thinking about this over the weekend, and they've all kind of kept together as a group and kept in touch. We all went to university, but I was the one who pulled back after a few days and then went off and did my own thing. And back in that was the 80s, the late 80s, we didn't have mobile phones or anything. So we kept in touch, one or two of us by letter, but they've always kind of kept together. And I've not felt on the outside of them because I still have some contact with them. But it's interesting how that dynamic played out. It was like I was on the outside, even down to when we were at school, at junior school, they were selected for the netball team. I wasn't.
Yeah.
I just wanted to wear the nice little skirt and the velour top that they had, but I wasn't selected. They were in the top maths stream at school and got to do statistics, I think it was, as an extra qualification. I wasn't in the top maths stream at all. And I kind of look back and think I was always kind of I felt on the outside.
Yeah.
They didn't exclude me at all. They were lovely and they still are. But I think, I was kind of looking for my place.
Looking for your tribe, for your people.
Yeah. And I think you don't get the same kind of vibe if you work in an all-male environment. Like you've already said, men don't talk about their emotions. So when you've been in that environment, it takes a lot to actually verbalize what you're feeling, what you're going through.
I mean, I personally, when I worked in a male environment, it was very much, you'd find women in the toilets crying. You'd find whether they were being ill because they were pregnant or whatever, whether the one of the guys had been a bit abrupt with them and they were feeling particularly sensitive, whatever that may have looked like. But it was interesting. It was weird because I kind of liked the stability of the masculine energy. Like I knew where I stood with them. And I think that was perhaps what I liked about working for masculine companies, because you just knew, you knew what you needed to do, you knew how you needed to show up. And it was interesting because my role in PR, the sales, so we'd sit in the long line next, the marketing and PR team was primarily women, with the head was a man in every company I worked with. And then you had a row of there was a few creative guys in our space as well, but then you had a row of the sales team, and they were always men. And always sitting there and basically calling the PR and marketing team the team that were, oh, you're playing with your colouring pens and your glitter today. It's like, well, if we weren't doing our glitter and PR and felt tips, then you wouldn't have a sales job to do. And it's kind of interesting because that dynamic was very clear. And you had women in HR, there were very specific roles in the industries that I worked in, and it was very evident that sales was men, and
isn't it strange
caring roles were the females. So
and the fact that they maybe make comments about, oh, you're playing with glitter and stuff, and it's like, oh yeah, and we kind of accepted it because you don't want to be the one who says, don't you say that to me, and stand up and make a scene. So I think things are changing now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm talking a few years back now.
But I remember being in the army, and my now ex-husband from many years ago, we were getting married, we were in training, and we were dragged into one of the officers to see him because he didn't want us getting married and living in individual single accommodation on camp, because we only had a few months before we were being posted. And he basically said, if you don't move your wedding day, I'm going to post one of you straight out from, not finish your language course, post you straight out to a unit. And he just looked at me.
Oh,
And I mean, we did complain. We got some recompense from that. We got some action was taken. But I also remember two guys, senior guys, when I was 6 months pregnant, I was still at work. And because it was the summer, we used to wear these dresses. So as I started to show, I could just get a bigger dress. And these two warrant officers were walking down past my desk, and I remember them one saying to the other, "Oh, these women who get pregnant when they're serving. Do you know if they can't fit into the uniform, they shouldn't be allowed into work." It was honestly, it was like so. Okay, it's hormonal pregnancy, but it doesn't mean you can't do your job. It was incredible, and
yeah,
we took it. You just don't say anything because it's almost like you don't want to make a name for yourself. You don't want to be that person who, stands out.
yeah. I mean, oh,
I know it makes my skin
there's so
crawl
many
now.
quips I could share with you.
I bet.
Yeah, I mean, there was one guy who I got on really well with, and you jollied along with them because, ha, you're so funny.
Yeah.
But he was like, I'd leave to pick up my daughter from nursery, and I was pregnant at the time, and I think I'd leave at 4 to go
Mm.
and get her. And even then, I felt like I was doing a bad job as a mum because I was picking my daughter up and putting her into bed and continuing to work.
Yeah.
And he said to me, I stood up and he went, "Oh, these part-timers."
Oh, yeah.
Luckily, my boss was there and he was like, "Don't you start on my
Yeah.
don't you start on her. She works harder than any of you." It was nice to be in the situation where,
Mm.
I mean, it was a guy standing up for me, but
Yeah.
equally it was nice to have someone who had my back, if you like.
Yeah.
So,
It's
and it was a funny joke. And,
yeah.
we grew up with Freddie Starr and people like that.
Yeah. But it's those comments. I mean, there was a guy at work, and it was about maybe just before our partner sold his company, he worked for us. And he used to come in at like 7 o'clock in the morning. He didn't have to, but he always would. And I used to come in at normal time to start at 9. Yeah, I used to feel guilty because I wasn't in there doing those
Yeah,
hours that they were doing. So I felt incredibly like I was doing something wrong.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, let's unravel those stories because that's what we were telling ourselves. And
Mm,
but
yeah.
I could talk to you all day. So I guess the final question is like, what could be the worst thing you could read about yourself in a newspaper? Like, I know I do say this to quite a lot of my guests, but it's often where the shame is kind of very raw for people.
Yeah. I think it would be one or two things. It's either, and this is something I've struggled with recently, is, oh, she's banging on about menopause again. And it's that thing around, when you post online, it's almost like you put a post out and you have that, it's not true because you're only posting it to your circle of people and probably only 10% are going to see it. But you think you're putting your whole self out on the internet and every single person in the world is going to see that. And then when you post a second time, they're going to get sick of you. So there's that. And there's also somebody, I suppose, said, no, you're exaggerating. That didn't really happen to you. I've,
So
you know, with the things where like the brain fog and, well, really? But when I see that, it's not, I don't imagine it being women. I imagine it being men.
yeah, I guess they probably don't. I mean, I wouldn't like to assume because I'm not a guy, but I'm
Mm.
assuming that the chemical fluctuations in a female's brain is different to a man's, and that's why we need support. So yeah, it's that. I think it's knowledge is power, and I think what's really amazing about people like yourself talking about this and sharing wisdom on this is we didn't have, you know, when we talked about our mums, you talked about your mum and how she went through it. We didn't have that knowledge then. You know, we've got so much knowledge, and we're, you know, you've got neuroscientists are in the mainstream now talking about how our brains change as we grow, as we get older, and it's so fascinating. And I'm so grateful that we are in this kind of era where there's so much information available and people are talking about their experiences to make it, to be inspired, to educate, to make it better for other people. Like if you, like you say, it's like the whole, you're not the only one going through this. It's that kind of that bottom line. You're not alone in this, because we're all going through it in different ways, or we're either a few steps ahead of each other, or we're next to each other, or they're just coming up behind you. And I think that's what I find fascinating about this podcast, because there's always, I'm always learning from people that come on this show podcast, but also hopefully other people are also not feeling as alone in their situation.
And I think if just somebody takes, they only have to take one thing. There's often I've been listening to something or reading a book or being on a course, and I've usually taken it. As long as I can take one thing away from it that will help me, then that's great. And it's just, and they're like little building blocks, aren't they? When you start to, okay, and then you start to make a little bit of progress and it gets a little bit easier.
Is there anything you'd like to leave for your listener? How can your listeners find you? And
so I'm mainly on Instagram, so it's at revive_intuitive. I'm also on Facebook. I have Revive Intuitive as my page, but just search for Caroline J. Burns. That's my personal account.
And the work that you're doing, you're supporting women moving through menopause.
Yes. Yeah. But it's kind of moving. So I help them with the body, mind, and spirit aspect. And a lot of women, like me, when I've started to go through it, you think, it's just I've got these symptoms, so I need to sort them out. But it's a whole journey. And we're never out of menopause. Once you've had your day of menopause, you're post-menopause for the rest of your life. And rather than looking at it, I like to think you're not going to go back to the way you were. And that's the way it's supposed to be. You kind of like, you move through it, and you just find a new way of being, and it can be such a beautiful experience. Menopause isn't just about the awful things that are happening to your body, because we can do things about those to get women into a better place. But it's the transition through it can be a beautiful thing.
I love that. I love that so much, because I think that's the thing that I've, coming full circle from being, not having women around you to being in a situation where we're coming together to move through and share wisdom with each other and, generations to come. I think it's amazing. I love that. Thank you for coming on and sharing the story.
Thank you. It's been amazing.
Well, I'm really sorry. I have to wrap it up.
Okay.
Like I say, I always bring these people on and I'm like, I want to talk to you for hours. So I will include in the show notes how you can find Caroline if you found her story inspiring and you want to work with her. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate you showing up and listening to our stories, and join us again for another Shameless Stories next week.